Hey, this is Publishing Disrupted, and I'm editor Mick Silva.
I'm publisher and literary agent David Morris.
And we are two former Christian publishing industry professionals learning to navigate the massive independent book market.
Yeah.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
This podcast is basically exploring the ways in which book publishing is changing and how writers can best meet the challenge. So we're just trying to bring our knowledge to the audience of authors out there. And a lot of recent changes have disrupted the industry and continue to. So there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, and I think it helps to talk about it because
It does,
we get it can be pretty fluid and bewildering, and you have days where you feel like, what, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I've been in this 30 years and I know more than like 99% of the population.
You're at 30. I'm at 25 this year. I started in 2000. So
yet you still have that feeling like, I don't know.
No, I know. It's growing so much and has been changing so much within the last, I would say, 10 years. And not just because of Amazon, although that's one of the biggest disruptors we talked about.
Yeah. Probably self-publishing is what's changed the most.
Right.
In the last 10 years, if you were to pick something that was connected to 10 years.
Absolutely.
Because the digital retail revolution has already started and was and was even maturing in the last 10 years, to be honest.
Yeah, I look at that as like the blog, like this shift from just someone had a blog and they're now building a platform to actually having viable options for self-publishing. To about 2015. But anyway, we had some questions we were thinking we would like to answer because we get top questions from people all the time, and we hear them whether it's at parties or over the transom on email, and probably take up the bulk of our time in terms of what we tend to answer for people when they come to us for help. For me, obviously, as an editor, it can run the gamut. From will you just take a look at this to do I need an agent? And that's something that I think we could cover here. But I mean, probably the biggest one for me, I mean, obviously with writers just starting out is this any good? Do I have anything here? And they really just want to know, is this worth pursuing? And I think that's often, that's a fair question, but it's often a really difficult question to answer because, as well as I, it has as much to do with your fortitude and your interest and why are you writing the book? I think that's generally the question I ask back to them.
Right. The why is a really good question.
What's the passion behind it? Why did you think a book other than something else?
Because things like quality of writing or whether you're on topic or what the structure of the book.
Right.
Those things can all be worked on.
And we talked maybe first or second episode about excellence and what that means, command of language. You've talked about like proficiency and facility with language and for writing. I think that's something we could get into. But yeah, that's nothing to say for, is this any good yet? Because it could be.
Yeah.
I guess, or the related question is, well, then do I need an editor?
Yeah.
And that's where I generally, as an editor, will say yes. You need an editor.
Always. Pretty much always.
Everyone does. I need an editor. So to shift thinking from just, general John Q. Public, who's written a manuscript and comes to me on an email and asks, do I need editing? I would say, yes, you need editing. You need to know what makes a book ready and what makes an author ready, after the book is done. Now what? And then that's when they need you, a literary agent or a publisher, just to talk about their options. So I'm kind of maybe first step for a lot of people,
Well, in the indie publishing that I do, and to some extent agenting, but more in the indie publishing, I have authors who get the idea that they should have it edited before they turn it in. And that might be because they have an idea that maybe it's the indie publisher or the hybrid publisher isn't going to edit it, and that's not always the case.
Right.
So you don't need to do that necessarily.
Yep.
But oftentimes, a publisher, any publisher, only has so much bandwidth. Their editor only has so much bandwidth to do what we call the first edit, the developmental edit is what we call it. It's typically the first edit a publisher does. But you know as well as I that you've got a stack of other things to do. You've got an email inbox to deal with,
Right.
and if that manuscript isn't really that great, hopefully you've got the time and the resources and the mandate from your superiors to put a hold on a book until it gets worked on better.
But not always.
But you don't always. And then to some extent, it's the author's obligation to make sure it's in good shape. That's what's called getting a manuscript that's acceptable.
Right.
And if you've got to spend an inordinate amount of time getting it to the acceptable phase, then that's a consideration.
Yeah, and that's going to be tough.
With authors whose advances are really high, and their platforms are really big, usually the publisher finds a way to stop the presses and work on that.
Which does
work
happen.
On it.
Yeah.
Or they just publish it. That happens.
No, they don't do that.
Yeah, no. Big publishers don't do anything like vanity publishing. Of course not.
No, celebrity authors' books
Never.
are always wonderful.
Yeah.
So I mean, just to back up a little bit, because the developmental edit is what we're talking about, and when someone comes to me asking for, does this need editing, they are often asking about proofreading, or that's what they think editing is. So a lot of times I have to back them up and say, well, there's a few steps before that. Development is basically taking your idea and making sure that it's correctly not just formatted but presented. And for development, I think often I try to simplify that by saying, you try to augment what is there to make sure that it's on topic and flows in a logical manner. And then you try to diminish what's distracting.
Right.
And there's often a lot of digressions, sidebar material that needs to be turned into sidebars and is trying to hide as chapter material, or vice versa. Things that need to be expanded that you haven't sufficiently supported.
That's probably the hardest thing as editor, an in-house developmental editor, is the things that need to be expanded. Because you don't really have a lot of time to sort of send this back to the author. The typical turnaround time would be 3 weeks. Well, if you've got 2 or 3 chapters that aren't as strong as the rest of the chapters because they lack material, that's not something that can be solved.
No, it's not quick.
In 2 or 3 weeks, in addition to all the other little things you've asked about.
Right. So often it will involve shifting even the vision a bit to say, okay, this book isn't going to be able to cover that. Can we either include a note or some supplemental material? Oftentimes that's why you'll see an appendix. Or even notes within the text to say, check the website.
But that sounds a little bit like a workaround too, or it can be at times.
No, very much. Yeah, it's workarounds in-house. Anymore, as just an editor working on independent manuscripts, or even for independent publishers, we do have the time in the schedule to develop that.
Yeah.
And it will be a better book for it.
Yeah. If you're a first-time author, it's probably something you should try to have done and spend some money on. Even if you've got a conventional, and I prefer the word conventional, a contract with a conventional publisher. I think that you'd be surprised what they'll catch.
Oh yeah.
And if you're working with an editor who's editing, like if they've got a big workload, and you're not going to learn a whole lot about your writing from the in-house editor all the time. You can't 100% count on that. And if you suspect they're publishing a lot of titles a year, or they're busy, and you probably always suspect that, but and it might not be true, and they might take a lot of time with your manuscript, but oftentimes they only have a very well-defined window before they have to move on to something else.
Right.
So if you're a first-time author, having someone like you or another editor to, kind of help you tackle some of the global issues with the manuscript in your writing. That would probably be well worth your time and money. But for a 60,000 word nonfiction manuscript or even fiction,
Right.
You're talking $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 depending on how much needs to be done.
Yeah, 60,000 words for me is that's starting around 3,500. So it's an investment, and you don't know what you don't know. And so it's one of those difficulties that I have. I know you have them too, where you're trying to convince the author of something they don't know they need.
Right.
So you're basically just, trying to show them, hey,
what do you mean my writing's not good? My friends love this.
Yeah.
I've had this read by 4 people and they all love it.
They all thought it was great. I only need proofreading.
But they were your friends.
Yeah. Well, and often, you're getting into situations where you've charged a certain amount for a book, and now it needs more work because you weren't quite aware of the level of editing required. So, I've told my wife, Sherry, a few times I'm an uncredited ghostwriter on several books. And I may have been paid for a developmental edit. But yeah, sometimes you're doing a lot more. I couldn't do that in-house.
The rewriting.
As an in-house editor. There was no way.
Spending time rewriting page by page.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. And I mean, the publisher bought the book, so they're not going to...
a lot of hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're not going to notice you doing all that work anyway, so you just generally will publish it. This is one of the things I would love to know. I mean, are independent books actually better than some of the conventional books that are published now because of just the crunch in time schedules and the reality that, an editor who's on staff is not really motivated to put in the work that a manuscript necessarily needs. And most do need it. So
I have seen, I think, a range where some editors, like I can think of one at a very major, very large broad market house, one of the big 5 New York publishers, where the editor spent a lot of time working with the author on the developmental edit. Not an inordinate amount of time, but a lot. And the manuscript needed it. And the author was capable of responding to the edits quite well. To authors who, like, they turn in the manuscript and they get the revision back. It's like, wait a minute, what happened?
Right. Yeah.
Did this get edited?
Yeah, this is way under edited.
Yeah.
I was seeing that a lot, just even by colleagues on staff, that they were not the type of editor who would dig in on a manuscript. If it needed it, they'd hire that out.
Right.
But a lot of times that wasn't happening in-house.
A lot of pressure is on an acquisitions editor in a major imprint.
Right.
To acquire, and that takes a lot of relationship work, a lot of hand-holding.
Yeah, the incentive is on the editor to acquire books and to get bigger names.
To lobby for the biggest possible advance that the publisher can pay. So they can beat the other publisher.
You're trying to beat
competing.
the other publisher.
Yeah.
That's how it works. I was continually asked, who are the biggest authors you can go after, and every month or quarter at least, there was kind of an audit of all the relationships that you could go exploit basically for new books, and that's what's taking up most of in-house editors' time, not working on books.
Right.
So. Right. All of that to say, it does behoove you to get an editor and to hire it yourself before you seek publishing, and maybe even before you seek representation. I think, depending on your goals.
And there are a lot of editors out there. Publishing has contracted in terms of the number of positions that are out there. So in the last 30 years, it's contracted quite a bit.
Yeah.
So that means there's a lot of experienced, knowledgeable editors in your area of expertise of content.
Yeah, and I think you can go on Reedsy. I'm on there, but a lot of experienced editors are on Reedsy.com, and that's a great place to go and at least get familiarized with some of the developmental editors there. Yeah.
Upwork maybe has some.
Upwork has great ones.
But Reedsy's more focused on publishing.
It is, and design as well, but I've found most of my colleagues, independent
And
editors.
definitely ask around.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as an author, you should be networking with other authors,
That's right.
and not like the New York Times bestsellers, but the people who
No,
are a couple steps ahead of you, a couple steps further down the road in
Right.
publishing, and they've got some experience under their belt, and say who do you know that edits books
Mhm.
that you really like,
Mm-hmm.
and then collect probably a number of names
Get some
before
names. That's right.
because you kind of
And
need to
quotes.
understand not just so much whether they're good, but are they the right fit
Right fit for you. Yeah. And
from,
why?
from a content point of view.
What does that mean?
From maybe even a personality or
Yeah.
cost point of view.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, what does it mean to be a good fit with a particular editor or even a publisher or agent? I think it's personality, obviously, initially,
Mhm.
but do they read the kind of material that you're asking them to
Yeah.
edit? I mean,
Yeah.
that's kind of
Yeah.
number one. I was working with someone recently, and it was for a sci-fi book, and I don't do a lot of sci-fi. And I told her
Yeah.
up front, I'm not the right editor for you. You should find someone else. She said,
Yeah.
well, just take a look at it anyway.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
did, but
Yeah.
I think, you definitely want to read pretty widely in your own area, in your own field, and then
Yeah.
read acknowledgement pages and find, who are the editors and agents
Yeah.
that you can reach out to and ask for independent help.
Speaking of agent, this reminds me of an experience I had as an agent. That's what I do. I do that part time, and I also do indie publishing a little more than part time.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Right.
which means a lot
On your
of
extra
time.
time. Yeah.
But I had somebody recommended to me who was a psychologist, and that's my thing. I mean, that's my
Mhm.
background. I want to work with more psychologists. I can be really helpful working with psychologists, and I have a PhD myself, and I love
Love to
getting
use it.
into I love getting into
Yeah.
the deeper learning.
Yeah.
But I ended up having a exploratory call with a person who was a psychologist, and my background is psychoanalysis,
Mhm.
psychoanalytic theory as a methodology for cultural critique.
Very cool.
Yeah, so that's a pretty specific but
Yeah.
very deeply and historically intellectual pursuit,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
less clinical. And I don't know, you may know this, but in the psychology world, in Americans, psychotherapy practices, there's a lot of different schools,
Mm.
and this person just didn't like Freud.
Oh.
Freud was like someone to have what's currency with the knowledge, but
Okay, yeah.
only in a way to
Not to
we've moved
use.
on from that. And
Right.
I'm like, well, for me, that's like, well, wait a minute, that sounds like resistance.
Hang on.
That sounds like you're protesting too much.
Yeah.
And oftentimes it is, because American
Yeah.
psychology is its own brand.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
There's all these different, if you go from country to country, there's differences. It's not just a science,
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
so that was an instance where it was like, okay, you know what? We shouldn't be working together because this is just not.
Fundamentally disagree.
We use different languages,
Yeah.
and we different meanings to things, whether we're
Right.
agreeing or. I'm sure there's common ground, but we just can't find
Right.
it
Right.
very
right.
quickly
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah.
It felt weird, honestly. I didn't,
Sure.
it was kind of unpleasant.
Yeah.
I was ushered off the call pretty quickly by this person. I'm like, okay, win some, you lose some.
We just have different opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think I've had authors where I know I'm not a fit for them, but it takes them a little while.
That's right.
To figure it out.
That's more the
right?
case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm not necessarily trying to convince them that I'm not.
Right.
I just want to educate them somewhat open-handedly and let them make their choice. But
Right.
yeah, I think sometimes when they have a professional in their grasp, they're reluctant to let go.
Yeah, I understand
So
that.
that can be hard.
Yeah, I get that a lot as well. Like, hey,
Mhm.
can you tell me more? And I usually have to say, I can only say, I
Oh,
usually
yeah.
somehow hint
Oh yeah.
in the email, here's what to do next if I were
Right.
you.
Next
And-
steps.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm quickly moving to next steps when that becomes clear. But yeah, shifting a conversation that way is not what I like to do. It's just something that we have to do. it's like being asked at a party as a doctor, you know, if you can look at this weird rash or something. You're like, that's not really appropriate, right?
I don't do weird rashes. I only do.
I'm not even that kind of doctor.
I'm not even going to say what came to my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
So-
that does happen.
So do I need an editor?
Yeah.
You know, and do I need an agent? Or people say, I think I need an agent. It's really more, I probably need an agent. I need someone to help me
Right.
take what I have and help me navigate the world of publishing. And that is true. You need help navigating the world of publishing. Do you need an agent? I would say yes.
Yeah.
You do.
Yeah. At least for the knowledge that they're going to offer you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, and to get out of the way, sort of, is, well, you're kind of not ready
Mm-hmm.
even for that, because an agent also has limits on their time and only so much capacity to
Right.
help you through. Like, for example, I don't believe it's an agent's job, and I know there's some agents that maybe think that it is, to help an author with their developmental edit type
Oh, no.
work.
Right. Actually editing their manuscript.
Yeah, or just seeing a whole, like, I know one agent that used to, or maybe still does, requires an author to write the whole manuscript before they start pitching.
Right.
And I can kind of get that.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be edited, perhaps.
Right. Or to show up with a proposal.
Or
already
maybe
ready.
what's more common is that the author wonders, can you help me sort of structure what this book should be? And to that, I think an agent can help.
Absolutely.
But if it's like a series of calls to
Yeah.
finally get to the right thing, that's probably too much time for
Mhm.
most agents to devote, unless you're an author that can command $1 million advance. And sorry, folks,
you-
only a few of you can do that.
Yeah, if you have a huge platform, go ahead. But otherwise,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, that's.
Or you've published really well in the past, and
Mhm.
you have a track record.
You probably don't need that kind of help, but yeah, learning and this is difficult because educating an author is largely what we do and how we spend a lot of our time.
Right.
One of the reasons I'm wanting to do this podcast is for that. So
Yeah.
it becomes this kind of like education process.
Right.
Where can you learn about what you don't know? And books are the best place. I'm still going to say it. Like you have to go to your library where we are right
Books
now.
about publishing, you mean?
Learn about
Mhm.
publishing.
Mhm.
Yes, read books, read the research books, read Writer's Market. There's a ton of articles and that they're freely available to you to go get educated on what publishing is and what
Right.
you need to do in order to enter that industry.
Right.
But most people will not do that. They will just call me and then
Right.
use our time
Right.
basically to try and figure out how can I get my book published.
Yeah, and to try to get to the level of having an agent that will take an interest in you, and everything depends. There's always exceptions, but it usually means, and I'm not an agent that's always angling for like the higher,
Right.
the bigger advances.
Yeah.
But I still have sort of a baseline.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't think an author can get a certain advance, let's say
Right.
at least $5,000,
It needs to be worth it.
then it starts to not really be worth either the author's or the agent's
Right.
time for the compensation that comes along with that.
And you're at 15%? Is
And
that?
yeah, 15% is like the standard
That is the
commission that an
standard
agent makes
commission.
on the author's royalties and the advance that is paid.
So
on
even
those
off of
royalties.
5,000, I mean, and it's paid in installments,
Right.
15% is not
No,
much money.
for the amount of work
So
that you might put into it.
You're talking about.
And
yeah.
so that's actually kind of low. I know some agents are
Mhm.
like, if I don't think an author can get a 6-figure advance, I'm not really going to work with them. And
Right.
I get that. They're
No.
trying to work at that kind of level or in
Yeah.
that kind of
That makes
context.
sense.
For me, my context is different. So
Mhm.
I'm
Mhm.
trying to work with authors who have a particular angle,
Right.
are doing kind of creative things, who
Yeah.
are saying things that aren't with the status quo.
Mhm.
And I'm fortunate that I'm able to try to do that, but it's hard work, and
Yeah, well, and there's
Yeah.
difference in agents. You kind of noted there. You're more boutique, or you're
Mhm.
more content driven,
Mhm.
where you can afford to basically go after the authors you like, and you don't necessarily have to just be mercenary and try to get the 6-figure advances.
Right. But sometimes you're not really ready even for that.
Mm-hmm.
That usually means for a publisher to pay a $5,000 advance, you always have to keep in mind that they're spending more than just that
That's
on
right.
you.
Yeah. Oh, a lot more.
In terms of their actual costs for
Yeah.
editing and designing, typesetting, managing overhead, publishing your book, we're talking like that's another $15,000. And if they do upfront print runs, that's another
Mm-hmm.
maybe $2,000, $3,000, $5,000. So now for your small platform author,
Debut
$5,000
author.
advance book,
Yeah.
that's we're like up to $25,000 investment on the part of the publisher.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, they've got to sell a pretty good number of books to make that money back.
That's
And
right.
a lot of times they do not.
Yeah.
And that goes for even the big advances. And
That's right,
sometimes
no.
even more so.
The
author-
margins are crazy in
Right.
publishing. It's not, the cover price.
Yeah.
Cover price for a book, is
So
how much does
sometimes
a
we have
publisher
to
make?
tell an author to go back and work on your audience some
Yeah,
more.
yeah.
Look at your personal and professional network.
Mm-hmm.
How much are you connecting with people outside of just writing?
Right.
Depending on your topic area, can you develop a stronger online platform and connect with people that way?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people ask, how many do I need? I think you need,
Oh, yeah.
well, I mean, I'd say a strong social media platform like Instagram, if like 5,000 would be really good.
Mm-hmm.
As long as your engagement is good too. It's
Engaged followers.
It's not just 5,000 and then you get like 2 likes on most of your posts. It's
right.
5,000 and you get 100 likes
Yeah.
or so
Yeah.
on a lot of your posts.
Yeah. That's regular posting.
And there's ways to get there.
Yeah.
And people get frustrated and cynical about that, but it's
Mhm.
honestly, it's really just think of it as a different medium to get
Right.
your content and make an impact. And
Yeah.
and that is very, very doable if you find the right attitude.
Well,
toward it.
you just got to be a systematic kind of
Yeah.
thinker. A lot of people use social media. I'm guilty of this. Just something comes to mind. I think it would be helpful. I put it up on Facebook
Yeah.
instead of having a plan, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to post twice a day and, do it at these times. And I have a list of things that I'm going to cover and they're ready to go. That's someone who's building their platform.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's very doable. But then let's say you are someone who has that potential with your manuscript and your platform. It's a growing may not be big, but you're doing some good things.
Mm.
It's growing. You can demonstrate that you have, some understanding of what it takes to market the book long term.
Mhm.
So let's say you qualify as being an agent's author. Why go with an agent? Yeah, there's a lot to know about publishing.
Right.
Even for someone who's published a bunch of books, you still don't know a lot.
Right.
I was even amazed sometimes at some very experienced agents that we worked with when we were at Harper
Yeah.
and so on.
Yeah.
When we had our big corporate publishing jobs,
Yeah.
it's like, whoa, you don't know about that? It's like,
Mhm.
you don't understand how that works in the
They
sales
skipped
marketplace?
A
And it's like,
step.
yeah, and it's like, oh yeah, well, that person actually never worked in publishing.
Sure.
In this case, they were a lawyer. And,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Don't
know,
know
it-
in-house operations.
don't necessarily know what's going on with a
Mhm.
lot of aspects to publishing, and that's
Mhm.
not a disqualification. It just means
No.
sometimes it's a strong qualification, but people just don't know what's going on, and I think it starts with how do you put a good proposal together?
Right.
That
Yeah.
there's a craft to that.
Mhm.
There's a lot of things everyday common sense doesn't quite work that way.
Right.
Like the most obvious one are the comparative titles that you put in there.
Mhm.
They shouldn't be. Don't pick like a giant
Just the biggest
bestseller.
books.
Don't compare yourself to a giant bestseller.
Right.
Don't pick something that's 20 years old.
Right.
I mean, those things sound like they're obvious, but authors do it all the time,
Yeah.
and so do some publishing people.
No, it's true. Well, it is
Um,
difficult. I think a lot of times the feedback from the sales
Yeah.
team will be,
Right.
conflicting.
At
But
a
yeah.
publishing house, yeah. And so there's a craft to putting a good proposal together. Then it's a question of who are the publishers I should target, and there are a lot of them out
Right.
there.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. If you're going conventional, there's different tiers of
Mhm.
publishers, and
Mhm.
and kind of getting to know that.
Mhm.
If we're talking about Christian publishing specifically, I think there is a good resource with the Christian Writers Market Guide, because that will give you the different tiered publishing resources available to you. And not a lot of the hybrid and self-publishing is in there, but I think it's helpful. It's put out by Steve Lobby, who is an agent. And that's just a resource that I think everyone needs to know if they're trying to get published in the Christian market.
Mhm.
If you're going toward independent book publishing, you need to be familiar with IBPA. And IBPA.com is Independent Book Publishers Association.
Mhm.
And they have a lot of useful tools and materials. Publishers Marketplace.
That's true, they do.
It's another one to be familiar with.
Publishers Marketplace, which is more of a clearinghouse of information for the publishing industry.
Publishing industry at large.
It's not so much geared toward authors, but
Right. They do have author resources
Mhm.
available in that, and they're subscription-based, most of them. But
they track
again,
a lot of the deals. That's what I think
Yeah,
agents
deals.
and publishers look at
Publisher's Lunch.
that.
Yeah, and being aware of what's selling is a helpful
Mhm.
tool for any author. But go to your library, because all those resources are available at a good, well-stocked library.
Mm.
And just to say, getting educated, that's what this episode I think is probably about, and being able to command some respect on your topic and write a good business document proposal for your book is absolutely something you need to learn how to do
Yeah.
if you're going to
Yeah.
publish books.
And I say this a lot too, is that context is everything in publishing. What kind of author are we talking about here? What kind
Mhm.
of topic area are we in? What kind of level?
That's
What
right.
kind of book? Fiction, nonfiction?
Specificity. Yes.
How do you position this?
Right.
What are the numbers involved?
Mm-hmm.
Who are the publishers? The agenting I do, I can pitch to just about any publisher. I'm pretty proficient at it.
Mm-hmm.
I have a narrow list of authors, so I can't say I've landed in a lot of different publishers, but the range of publishers. I actually did a Body Mind
Pitched
Spirit
to-
publisher recently,
Yeah.
and came close to actually a sexuality
Hey,
publisher.
not bad.
What's the right word? Not sexualized. That's not the right word. What am I trying to say?
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah. The wrong words are coming to my mind. All the wrong words come to my mind sometimes, not
Yeah.
the right word.
No, me too. It's an age thing.
Like- Like
Yeah.
romance that's really steamy. What's the right word for that?
Yeah,
Erotica.
erotica,
There we go.
yeah.
Erotica.
I was gonna say if it's fiction, yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. But mostly my area would be, what I know are the progressive house.
Yeah.
I know the conservative evangelical ones, and that they actually form the majority of religious-oriented publishers.
Right.
That they far outpace combined their annual dollar revenue is bigger than all of the other kinds of religious publishers combined.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's just
By
it's
a
just
lot.
unbelievable the difference.
Right.
But so when you look at the more progressive Protestant publishers, mostly of them are nonfiction too, by the way.
Right. Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And when you're talking about houses that are more denominationally structured, they're more connected to existing denominations. It's a much smaller playing field if you're an author that fits with me editorially.
Right.
And
Right.
so,
Same here.
and that's what I actually kind of enjoy. I say, well, there's really only a few good options here for you.
It is just
And are
smaller,
you ready
yeah.
for that publisher?
Right.
And I'll tell you exactly what you need to do to get ready.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a great way to be focused, even though
That's
your
right.
options are
Very
are
quickly.
limited.
Yeah, and that now you have some focus to your research as an author,
Mm-hmm.
and you can go look at the books that they're publishing, even within the span, like what's coming up,
Right.
and say, okay, do I see where I might fit
Right.
with this cadre of authors?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great, and to be able to, I want to talk more about this next time and get into some of that progressive Christian space, because that's where I'm spending most of my time too. But like being able to quickly assess something and narrow down and get specific for an author, it gives them some next steps,
Mm-hmm.
and we can be able to hopefully with this podcast as well, help people figure out their next steps.
Yeah, there you go.
Let's keep going. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Good
we didn't
chat.
get to all our questions.
No,
but we can do that next
We
time.
have
as
more
well.
questions for later.
We have plenty of questions.
Send us your questions.
Yeah, there you go. I want to hear about it. Yeah, we will actually get this podcast up and published at some point, and then
We're the typical book editors. We take forever to get something
no,
done.
I know we've got 4 in the hopper. We need to get this out there. But yeah, who knows how far it will go. We'll keep it going as long as it's helpful. So thanks for being here.
Thank you.